The subject of Sith redemption is a contentious one, particularly because of its rarity. The Sith are selfish beings, worked by a sentient energy that actively influences them to become more twisted and evil. To break from this malevolent energy is nearly impossible, and any being that has done it is the exception rather than the rule. The most famous redemption story is of course the one that saved the entire galaxy, Darth Vader finding his way back to Anakin Skywalker. But in the story of Anakin's fall and subsequent redemption, he shares a great deal in common with another contemporary Sith Lord, Count Dooku. The two mirror one another from how they were both revered Jedi who fell from grace due to the irresponsibility of the Jedi Council and their personal beliefs. However, the subject of redemption is where the path diverges. Despite the noble intentions of Dooku, and the ones that he carried with him, he resisted the light and ultimately rejected it till the very day that he died. Even on his execution block, Dooku held the Sith way, hoping that Sidious had a way out. Greetings again, lore junkies, and welcome back to the archives. In today's holocron, we wanted to explore why, if Dooku and Anakin shared so many similarities, was it impossible for him to be redeemed the same way that Darth Vader was? This question came to our mind when we were reading the Legends novel Labyrinth of Evil. This book takes place at the end of the Clone Wars, a mere few weeks before the Battle of Coruscant. In the book, Grandmaster Yoda and Supreme Chancellor Palpatine are having a meeting where they discuss the state of the war and the best way to end it. Yoda believed that the capture or the death of Dooku was the first and the most important step to bring the Clone Wars to a swift end. Interested by this though, Palpatine inquired why Yoda was not considering the idea of Dooku having his mind changed back to the Jedi way and embracing the light. Sidious is genuinely curious about how Yoda thinks, and the Grandmaster remembers his discussion with his former Padawan, a discussion that took place on the world of Vajun, a very mournful decree that Dooku was too far gone. Redemption for him was impossible, as it would be for anyone who would tread down the path of the dark side as Dooku had. The conversation on Vajun we speak of comes from another Legends novel, Yoda Dark Rendezvous, which happens earlier in the timeline. In the climax of Yoda Dark Rendezvous, Yoda goes to Dooku's castle on Vajun, where he breaks into his office through the window. The two then have a deeply emotional and a spiritual conversation about the Force, their political philosophies, and Dooku's ideology. Most famously, this is the instance where Yoda implores Dooku to teach him about the dark side. Yoda deeply desired to know why so many Jedi had fallen victim to it, and why his old Padawan and dear friend was now a Sith Lord. Taken aback by this, Dooku would proceed to try to entice Yoda to use the dark side, tempting him with his deepest, darkest desires, or to try to convince the Grandmaster that what he desired was too simple. As a seasoned master, Yoda had learned to divorce his wants from the material plane. Yoda tried to remain detached and at peace. The only thing that really bothered him or made him afraid was the lives and deaths of the Jedi, all of whom he considered to be his children. Dooku jumped on that and told him to be angry about it, to demand justice and to claim it for himself. Eventually, after the back and forth, Yoda would give in and let himself feel the darkness. Only a glimpse. In that moment, fear struck Dooku as he saw the picture of what nearly 900 years of experience with the Force would look like if it were twisted and evil. It was a terror that was stronger than Sidious, a threat that could end all life in the galaxy. As Dooku puts it, a Yoda gone rotten. But as soon as it arrived, it was gone, like a passing shadow. And Yoda was back to his old self again. He simply stated that the dark side was not for him, and he didn't see any allure to it. Finally, after having scared Dooku half to death, he reminded him that there would always be a home for him among the Jedi. Despite everything that Dooku had done, Yoda was ready to forgive him and to open his arms up to welcome the prodigal son back home. Unfortunately, other Jedi such as Anakin arrived at the castle in this moment, and the tiny crack of a window within Dooku's heart, a window that may have allowed some light in, was now slammed shut. Believing Yoda had tricked him to buy time, the Count ignited his lightsaber and the two entered a duel. After that, Yoda perceived in the Force that Dooku's heart would be hardened forever. He had given it his best shot and he had failed. His Padawan now belonged forever to the dark side. There are many who find this hard to accept though, due to the honorable reasons why Dooku departed the Jedi. In order to learn the chances of redemption, we have to look at what caused Dooku's fall, so it's time for a quick recap and comparison with Anakin. There exists some slight differences between the legends and the canon explanation for Count Dooku's fall, but since we're already referencing Legends material in this video, we'll be sticking there for simplicity's sake. As Dooku himself explains, he had noticed the corruption of the Galactic Republic for decades, how the Senate saw and operated among the Jedi, using them as tools for their own means. And worse, he saw the Jedi were complacent to it at best or an accomplice to it at worst. Despite being the guardians of peace and justice, they were allowing the Senate to dictate where they intervened and how far they could go. And not only were the Jedi being used as police forces, but they were also being ordered to take care of situations where the Republic was blatantly in the wrong. The event which fully shook Dooku's faith in the Jedi Order was the mission to Galadran. Dooku would recall the story much later in life when making a recording in the Tedran holocron. This is his story, a story that is shortened in some places for the sake of brevity. And so it was as a Jedi Master, some 24 years ago, that I led my Padawan Komori Vosa and a Jedi Knight task force to Galadran, a snow-covered planet in the Outer Rim. We had been summoned by Galadran's governor, who claimed the Mandalorians were committing atrocities against his people. Thanks to Master Thame, I had some knowledge of the history of the Mandalorians. I was also aware that there had been decades of infighting between two Mandalorian factions, but they operated primarily on lawless worlds outside of Republic space. Because Galadran was a Republic world, and the Mandalorians' alleged actions were brazen as they were barbaric, I allowed two possibilities. Either the butchers on Galadran were imposters, or something had caused the Mandalorians, whichever faction they were, to change their ways. Tragically, I did not allow for a third possibility. Galadran's governor had lied, and the Jedi Council were pawns and believed him. Our task force totaled 20 Jedi, all hastily withdrawn from various respective assignments for this emergency. The Jedi Council had selected us not because of our combat experience, but because of our proximity to Galadran and how fast we could get there. I was the senior Jedi Master, and when I realized that most of my comrades' awareness of the Mandalorians was, shall we say, limited, I was beyond chagrined. Yet the situation was urgent. Innocent people really were being slaughtered on Galadran. Against any other small army, 20 Jedi would have been more than enough. But based on what I knew of the Mandalorians, I did not hesitate to request reinforcements from the Jedi Council. In hindsight, I should have insisted, but reinforcements could only travel so fast through hyperspace. And as I said, innocents were dying. We located the Mandalorians in a small valley and had the high ground when we surrounded them. I wasn't surprised when they refused to surrender. Galadran was a bloodbath, and when the conflict ended, 11 Jedi and all but one of the Mandalorians lay dead in the snow. The surviving Mandalorian was named Jango Fett. He'd killed 3 Jedi with his bare hands. As a Jedi, I could neither hate nor fear Fett, but I did feel something for him that surprised me. I felt respect. Had Fett and I been the only survivors of that battle, I would have lowered my lightsaber and bid him a safe journey. He was the last of his kind, and I had never known another being who so thoroughly deserved to go wherever he pleased. But other Jedi had survived as well, and I doubted that we were unanimous in our regard for Fett. In the end, it was the Council who decided his fate, for via transmission they ordered me to turn him over to Galadran's governor, and like a gutless animal, I obeyed. The governor remained in power, and Fett was sold into slavery. Although Jedi lives had been lost, it was quickly concluded that we had accomplished our mission, and there was no subsequent investigation. Eventually, I learned the entire fiasco had been a setup. The civilians had been killed not by Fett's faction, the true Mandalorians, but by Death Watch. Hoping to crush the true Mandalorians, Death Watch's leader had collaborated with Galadran's governor to lure Fett's faction with a false assignment, then summon the Jedi for help. We had been exploited, we had been used, and we were fools. Following this, Dooku was shocked and saddened by the ferocity of his own Padawan Komori Vosa and what she had done during the battle. Sickened, he refused to commend her for the Jedi trials, and she was subsequently released from the Order. Infuriated, Komori Vosa snuck into the Jedi mission to the planet of Baltazar in order to prove to her master and the Jedi High Council that they were wrong. There, the Jedi fought the ruthless Bando Gora cult and took heavy casualties. At the end of the fight, Vosa was missing and presumed dead. Dooku would then go to the High Council, accusing them of wasting Jedi lives for political reasons. These events altered Dooku forever, and he stopped accepting missions from the Council out of protest. Eventually, Dooku became fascinated with something else, the holocron of prophecy. The prophecy spoke of dark times washing over the galaxy, but when Dooku took these findings to the High Council, the warnings were ignored. His frustration grew and mounted over the years until Naboo, when the Jedi refused to get involved to protect the planet from the Trade Federation. However, they still allowed Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan to lend aid, which resulted in Qui-Gon Jinn's death to Darth Maul. Losing such a valuable friend was too much for Dooku, and he would formally resign from the Jedi Order without giving an official reason. Returning to Sereno, he would take up his family's title and became Count Dooku. In his words, "I had no interest in whether my relations had any love for me. I could not have cared less if their vaults contained any reserves in my name. But because he was the last surviving member of his house, the mantle fell to him." Dooku would briefly consider hunting down the Sith Master who had trained Maul to kill Qui-Gon Jinn, but he quickly decided against such a course action, believing that the Jedi Council shared more of the blame of Qui-Gon's death than the Sith did. It was their fault for not listening to the warnings of the dark side, for being blind to the return of the Sith. Their inaction caused Qui-Gon's death just as much as the Zabrak's lightsaber did. So instead, Dooku sought out the Sith in hopes of learning exactly what they were after. He told all of this to Palpatine in confidence, never knowing that he was the Sith all along. Palpatine did not reveal himself immediately, and waited a while, at least until after the death of Master Plagueis. But soon, he would come to Dooku as Sidious, and the two would have a very long conversation. With their discussions, Dooku came to learn that he had a lot in common with the ideology of the Sith. Dooku truly believed that the Republic and the Jedi as they currently stood were beyond any hope of salvation. They were corrupt and actively harming the galaxy. A new regime needed to be imposed, one that was strong, where the strong would rule the weak and could not be bought off by corporations playing on their greed. Dooku came to believe that those with the Force could rule those that did not have it, that there should be a ruler of the galaxy who served only themselves and their own power, rather than the pursuit of money and luxuries like the Senate. Only then could stability be achieved. The actions that the Sith had to take made Dooku uncomfortable at first, and for a time he refused to kill any Jedi by his own hand. But little by little, he made more and more compromises to his morality, holding fast to the ideas that he could use the dark side without it using them, that he could stare into the abyss and keep his soul. Dooku believed that his newfound power alone could fix the galaxy, but soon enough he was corrupted beyond hope. He began to look down on those beneath him and desired to step on them like insects. He mocked Jedi and took pleasure in cutting them down just to show how outclassed they really were in the shadow of his own power. Tyrannus delved deeply into the knowledge of the Sith, becoming obsessed with the weapons and rituals of the ancients. He embraced the ways of hatred and absorbed the dark side into his very being, becoming one of the most powerful Darksiders in this era, and relishing in that fact. Just like Yoda, we all wanted to see the good in Dooku, and believed him to be a tragic hero, but the fact of the matter is that he was twisted irrevocably to evil, and just like Yoda, sooner or later, we must realize this truth. Anakin's story is much different. It was hardly the pursuit of grandeur and political ideas that disillusioned Anakin from the Jedi. It was people. Growing up in a humble home, Anakin knew only love of his mother, the companionship of his friends, and the injustice of slavery. Anakin vowed to become a Jedi and to free all the slaves so that no one had to suffer this injustice. The idea that he could be the chosen one only excited him all the more and gave him a bit of an ego. But unlike Dooku in his youth, Anakin was never interested by the things of the Sith. He had pulls towards passion and recklessness, true, but never a hunger for power's sake. That changed though when his mother died. Taken from her happy home by the savage Tuskens, this saint of a woman was the last person that deserved torture and death. Anakin, already confused and struggling with feelings for Padme, would get nightmares of his mother's condition. He raced to Tatooine to find her, only to have her die in his arms. She held on until she could see her son again, but gave up what little life she had left once he arrived. Like sand slipping through his fingers, he had just been barely too late. He gave in to the dark side for the first time to get revenge on the Sand People, and in that slaughter, Darth Vader would be born. Vader in the Revenge of the Sith novel is described as a dragon squeezing a dying star. The star is Anakin's heart. It whispered to him that everyone he loved and cared about would be taken. For the remainder of the Clone Wars, Anakin would repeatedly try and fail to vanquish this dragon and to save those around him. And despite being told that he was the chosen one destined to bring balance, he couldn't muster enough of his supposed legendary power to keep the ones he cared about from dying. It all reached a head when he began having visions of Padme dying in childbirth, just like he had visions of his mother. After everything he'd been through, he could not bear losing his wife. He could not live without her. Desperation drove him to wanting access to more power. And in his ruminations, he wondered if there were things about the Force that the Council was not telling him. The Jedi Archives had special holocrons and knowledge that Anakin believed could give him an answer, but these sections were forbidden to anyone but Jedi Masters. Anakin was eventually given a seat on the Council, but denied that rank. Once again, he came so close only to have it slip through his fingers. Partially, he was insulted that after everything he had done during the war, he wasn't recognized for his efforts. There was indeed an aspect of pride involved, but the deeper reason was needing access to this knowledge and the secrets held in these collections. Anakin's mind spiraled out of control and he panicked. He wanted to be all-powerful, to be a Jedi that could stop his wife from being taken away from him like his mother was. And to this end, he began to lust for power. He became so desperate that the lines of light and dark in the Force meant nothing. Despite Master Yoda's instruction, Anakin's love for Padme had become an obsession with control over life and over death, giving birth to selfishness and to greed. The dark side, the Sith, Palpatine, it was all a means to an end. He cared nothing for the Sith grand plan, or for their cause. Even the existence of the Jedi was diminished in the bright love that he had for his wife. From this fear of loss, anger at the Council, and hatred of himself for being too weak, this would give rise to suffering that would feed Darth Vader. Then with his own two hands, he burned it all down. His life, the Jedi, even his wife and child whom he had sought to protect. In that moment, Anakin realized the ultimate irony of the dark side, that it would promise you everything you wanted, but take everything you have. And in the end, power is all he would have left. And so was the dark side. Anakin was not gone, but locked away in the prison that Darth Vader constructed around him. Too defeated, too weak to resist, Anakin lay dormant for decades. That was until a new hope arose in the galaxy, but not just for the galaxy, but for him. His children had lived, and despite the warnings that Luke received from Obi-Wan and Yoda, he believed in the good of his father. Obi-Wan and Yoda had witnessed Anakin's fall but had misunderstood every aspect of it. They downplayed what he went through with Padme and only focused on his lust for power and their own personal failures for realizing too late. But Luke felt the conflict within his father. Anakin awoke and was screaming out for help for the last vestige of his family. Unlike the others in his life, Luke did not represent his past, but a hope for a future Vader believed was far beyond him. Anakin was rescued when he grabbed onto this lifeline that his son threw to him, climbing out of the muck of fear and darkness created by Vader. Anakin overcame his dark side and destroyed the Sith, both figuratively with himself and literally with the Emperor. In the end, the biggest differences between Vader and Dooku was love. Anakin's love for the people in his life led him to do what he did, but Dooku only ever had love for himself. Yoda knew him personally, but continued to represent all the reasons that he had left the Jedi. This was why Obi-Wan could not turn Anakin, nor could Ahsoka turn him. They represented the past that he left behind, but Luke represented the future that he had always wanted. Dooku had no such strong presence of love in his life to save him from the darkness, and so when Dooku went deeper and deeper, he could no longer be recovered. As Grandmaster Luke Skywalker would later say, Anakin and Darth Vader to him were two separate entities. Vader was not truly Anakin himself, but rather a separate personality born from love and attachment, molded by greed and fear that resulted from it. Meanwhile, Dooku and Tyrannus were one and the same, and they would always be one and the same. And that is why Dooku is forever lost. And that is why Dooku could never be redeemed the way that Anakin was. It all really came down to the fact that Dooku had no love within him anymore, and was fully convinced of his own way. But Vader had the heart of Anakin still beating deep down, longing to be freed from the cage of hatred and suffering that he had embraced. The solution seems so simple, but it made a world of difference in their two journeys, and it's what makes the redemption of Vader so compelling to this very day. and the inability of Darth Tyranus Dooku to be redeemed, also so fascinating. But anyway, my friends, lore junkies, and acolytes, thank you so much for visiting the archives here today as we discuss one of our favorite Star Wars characters in the great Count of Sereno. And as always, may the Force be with you.